Please welcome to the stage Sue Alvarez.
I want to tell you about my father. His name was Samuel Augustus Foster, or Sam to his friends. Now, he was a very friendly, open gentleman who was always finding people in pubs or wherever he happened to be, and he'd bring them home because he could see they were hungry. They were either hungry or they were unhappy and they needed a friend. And my dad just was one of those people who'd sit and listen to anybody. I remember coming home from school and there'd be Dad having made a whole pile of food for this person, and he'd be sitting there chatting away to them. And this used to, I have to tell you, annoy my mother quite a lot, because the chops we were going to have for dinner had disappeared, and then she had to find something else for us to eat. It never seemed to faze my dad, though, and it also annoyed me rather a lot too, because I had to do the washing up after Dad had fed these friends in need. Now, my father was a musician, and he was a very eclectic musician. He could play the cello for classical music, he could play the saxophone for dances, and he could play the musical store for variety shows. And this meant he was an ideal candidate to get a job on the P&O shipping line as part of the entertainment crew. And this is what he did. He would get a job, he would leave London, go to Australia carrying all the migrants, and 6 weeks later come back with all the Australian holidaymakers. And this gave us a little respite from all our friends his friends in need, or so we thought. I want to tell you how this happened to me when I was 17 years old. You could say they were my halcyon days. I had just finished my HSC, A-levels, which is like the HSC here. And I had the house to myself. Mum was at work, my sister was at work, my dad was away at sea, and I was alone. And I was totally and utterly besotted with two men, older men. One was Anton Chekhov, and the other one was Tennessee Williams. And I spent my days looking in the mirror, being Marcia from the Three Sisters. I am in mourning for my life. And then, when I got bored with Marcia, I became Blanche Dubois from a streetcar named Desire. I have often relied on the comfort of strangers. And added to that, I had another special art that I practiced. I'd only just learnt to do it. I'd been on holidays in France, and I'd learnt to smoke Gauloise cigarettes, unfiltered. I loved it, and I was having a most wonderful time. And then the phone rang. My dad from Tilbury. You'll have to clear out your room. I've got an elderly Australian coming to stay for 6 weeks, and you will have to sleep share your sister's bedroom. I'll be home in about 3 hours. Farewell, Anton. Farewell, Tennessee. Goodbye, Gauloise. Hello, elderly Australia. I can still see him. I can still see him. It was 56 years ago. He was short and stocky, and he had sort of red, wispy hair. And when he shook hands with you, it was like shaking hands with sandpaper. His hands were covered in calluses. My dad introduced him as Mr. Harry Bradshaw. How do you do, Mr. Bradshaw? I said. He said, call me Harry, girlie, call me Harry. Only the taxman calls me Mr. Bradshaw. And I thought, that's amazing. That has never happened to me before. When I grew up, adults, you always had to call them Mr. or Mrs. or Miss, unless they were friends of your parents, and then you called them auntie and uncle. But Harry was just like that. He was very friendly and down to earth. He said, I'm as fit as a Mallee bull, girlie, and I'm a fair dinkum Aussie. And he would come out with all these amazing Australian expressions like, geez, you've been flat out like a lizard drinking. But the one I really liked was when, if you asked him if he'd like a cup of tea, he'd say, too right I would, girlie. I'm as dry as a tomcat's teat. There was one other expression he used all the time, constantly, and I could never figure out what it was. If I was going out or was going to do something, he'd always say, good on ya, girlie, good on ya. I thought it was some mystical Aboriginal expression. It was my job to get his breakfast, obviously. And I got used to enjoying doing that because we'd have a chat, and or a yarn, as Harry would say. And I learned a lot about him. He said he was a fair dinkum Aussie, but in actual fact, he was born in London. And when he was 8 years old, his mother died, and he had 3 younger brothers and sisters. Now, in those days, if you didn't have extended family to help you bring up 4 kids, they had to go into care. And that's what happened to Harry and his family. He went into Dr. Bernardo's, and he said, it was pretty good, girlie. You got free food, you got good clothes, you got to learn to read and write. It was okay, girlie, it was all right. And one day, when he was 12 years old, a man in a striped suit came to talk to the children, and he said, hands up, who would like to go on a big ship to Australia? You get 6 weeks on the ship, you get all the food you can eat, play games, have a lovely holiday, and at the end of it, you get a good job. Well, Harry and 6 other boys thought that was a fantastic opportunity. He had no idea where Australia was, but he didn't care. All he could think about was the food and the games. So he came to Australia, and he disembarked in Brisbane. And then he and the 6 boys took another long journey, and that was to far north Queensland, and they ended up on the cane fields. They were going to be cane cutters. And he said, it was pretty good, girlie, as long as you got used to the flies, the heat, the snakes, and the hard yakka. It was all right. He said, I was a 10-10, 2 1/4 boy. That was what we got. Those was our rations. We got 10 pounds of salt beef or mutton, 10 pounds of flour, 2 pounds of sugar, and a quarter of tea a week, and a shilling a week. And he said, you couldn't spend it on anything, so Dr. Bernardo's used to put it in the bank for us. I became a gun cutter girl, he said. I got real good money. And then I met the love of my life. I had settled down, got married, and we had a very happy life. But last year, girlie, my beloved wife died. And my daughters, all three of them, they clubbed together and sent me on a trip back home to see if I could catch up with any of my siblings. He went on the Strathmore, which is where my dad was playing in the band and the orchestra, and he spent most of his spare time playing whist or cribbage with the passengers. That's what they were encouraged to do, and as you can imagine, my dad loved doing that. That's where he met Harry, and Harry came to stay with us. About a week before Harry was to go back to London, in Australia, he went up to town. He had tried to find his siblings, but at Somerset House, he'd discovered they'd all died. He said probably because they had a soft life over there, or the damp got them, you know. He said, I'm lucky, I'm still alive, still going good, fit as a mallee bull. This particular day, he came back from being in London, and he had a big parcel. It was from Hamley's toy shop. And I said, what do you got in the parcel, Harry? He said, come on, girlie, I'll show you. So we went into the front room. He opened this parcel, and bit by bit, he took out each piece of a Hornby train set. And he proceeded to kneel down and set it all up and got this train set running around our front room. I said, Harry, who's the train set for? It's not for your daughters, is it? He said, no way, girlie, no way. I said, well, it's not for your granddaughters, is it? He said, no way, girlie, no way. So I said, well, who is it for, Harry? And he said, girlie, you remember I told you when I was in Dr. Bernardo's and we had to share everything. We had to share toys, everything. There's one thing I always wanted in my life was a train set, just like this. And I was standing, looking at this toy shop, and I said to myself, girlie, Harry Bradshaw, you're 82 years old, you've got money in your pocket, why don't you go in and get it? So I did, girlie. It's for me, girlie, it's for me. And then it suddenly struck me what that magical mystery term was that he kept using. And I said, good on you, Harry. Good on you. And then, as you can see, he sparked such an interest in Australia for me that I came out here just to see what it would be like to be a fair dinkum Aussie. I've been here 56 years. It's the best thing I ever did in my life. Thank you, Harry. Thank you, Dad.